My husband called me dramatic when my dad was in an accident, and then went on the trip alone like I didn't even exist. The day everything really shifted for me did not look dramatic from the outside. I was at my desk in this boring open office, pretending to care about a spreadsheet that kept freezing on my computer, when my phone started buzzing on repeat inside my bag. It was my neighbor calling, then another call, then a text from my neighbor again, confirming which hospital they took him to. I felt that little drop in my stomach before I even picked it up, because when people call instead of text, it is never something simple like, "Hey, what do you want for dinner?" By the time I actually checked the screen and saw the words about my dad being taken to the hospital after getting hit by a car, my hands were already shaking. I remember standing up so fast my chair rolled back and almost knocked into the woman behind me. I grabbed my bag, mumbled something to my manager about an emergency, and half ran, half stumbled out of the building. It is funny how your body moves on autopilot while your brain is still stuck on one sentence. My dad got hit. My dad fell. My dad is in the hospital. I kept repeating it in my head like if I stopped, he would disappear. At the hospital, the doctor explained that it could have been way worse, which I guess was supposed to make me feel better. My dad had a fractured ankle, both wrists badly sprained from the way he tried to catch himself, some bruised ribs, a whole list of things that sounded minor when they said it fast, but did not look minor when I saw him try to move. No head trauma, no internal bleeding, just, in their words, mobility issues. I remember nodding like that phrase meant something normal, but when I saw him trying to sit up and failing, I realized exactly what mobility issues meant. It meant he could not stand without help. He could not cook. He could not shower. He could barely even scratch his nose. My dad is one of those stubborn older men who would rather crawl across a parking lot than admit he needs help, so of course he tried to make jokes. He told me the car probably looked worse than he did. He said this was what he got for still walking to the grocery store like a teenager. He insisted he would be fine on his own once they sent him home, as long as he had his remote and his favorite snacks. Meanwhile, he could not even hold the little plastic cup of water without his hands shaking. By the time they talked about discharge, I already knew there was no way he was going back to an empty house without some kind of support. My mom has been gone for years, and my dad has been living alone in that small place ever since, surviving mostly on stubbornness, canned soup, and whatever meals I managed to sneak into his fridge without him accusing me of treating him like a child. I called around and found this home nurse service that could send someone a few hours a day to help him with basic stuff. I set everything up before he even signed the papers to leave because I know him, and if I had asked first, he would have refused on principle. All of that, by the way, happened the same week my husband and I were supposed to finally take this big vacation we had been planning for months. Sun, drinks, a nice hotel, the whole cliché. We had spent evenings arguing about beach versus mountains, city versus quiet, and we landed on this resort town that was supposed to be exactly what we needed. We had both been working nonstop, barely seeing each other except to pass out in the same bed. The joke was that we were going to remember what each other actually looked like without work clothes and eye bags. So there I was, sitting on one of those plastic chairs by my dad's hospital bed, holding my phone in one hand and his discharge papers in the other, staring at the dates. The check-in date for the trip glared at me from the confirmation email. The nurse was explaining the medication schedule, my dad was fighting with the hospital television remote, and all I could hear was my own brain saying, "There is no way I can leave him like this. There is just no way." That night, when I finally dragged myself home and walked into our house, my husband was in the kitchen, going through a stack of travel printouts like he was planning a military operation. He had the little notepad out, the one he uses when he gets into project mode, and there were already lists of places to visit and things to do. He had even looked up restaurant menus and circled dishes he wanted to try. It should have been cute. It used to be cute. He looked up when I came in and smiled. And for a second, I almost did not want to say anything. I wanted to step into that version of my life, where the worst thing happening was whether my bathing suit still fit. But then I remembered my dad's face when he tried to shift in the bed and pain shot through him, and I heard myself say, without even easing into it, "We need to talk about the trip." My husband put the papers down slowly, like I had just told him the vacation spot burned down. "What about it?" he asked, even though my voice alone should have told him this was serious. I explained about the accident again, even though I had called him from the hospital earlier. I told him the nurse could help, but my dad could barely move, that he lived alone, that at least for the first couple of weeks he was going to need someone checking in constantly. I said, "I think we should see about postponing the trip, or maybe canceling and rebooking for later." I called the airline while I was waiting in the hallway. They said we could probably get credits or at least most of the money back, The hotel has that flexible policy you liked, remember? We would not lose everything. He stared at me for a long moment like he was trying to decide if I was being serious or auditioning for some prank show. Then he did this little laugh with no humor in it and said, "You are being dramatic again." That word hit me in the gut. Again. As if this was some pattern where I cried over spilled milk and not my 60-something-year-old dad with 2 busted wrists and a broken ankle. I said, "I am not being dramatic. I am just saying I do not feel comfortable leaving him like this for 2 whole weeks. He cannot even get himself to the bathroom right now." My husband shook his head. "He has a nurse. You just said that. This is exactly what those services are for. You cannot keep letting him pull you into every crisis. We have worked our asses off for this trip. I need this break. You need this break. You are overreacting." I felt my face getting hot. Overreacting? He literally got hit by a car. And he is alive, my husband snapped. He is not in the intensive care unit. He is not dying. He has professionals around him. You call him every day anyway. You can keep calling. You can check in. Why does everything have to be on you personally? In person, every second? That is something about my husband you should know. When he feels cornered, he goes cold. Not loud, not violent, just icy. It is like a switch. He goes from joking and affectionate to this flat, detached tone, and suddenly, you are the crazy one for feeling anything at all. I used to think it was just how he dealt with stress. Later, I understood it was how he exerted control. I tried to keep my own voice steady. It is not about everything being on me. It is about being there for my dad. He lives alone. Mom is gone. I am literally all he has. If I was the one in that hospital bed. And he booked a trip the week after. You know he would cancel it in a second to help me. My husband rolled his eyes. Your dad would love the drama. He lives for having a crisis. Besides, we already put so much money into this. Flights, hotel, time off work. We are going. I am not throwing all that away because your dad sprained something. The way he said sprained something made me want to throw something at his head. I took a breath instead. It is not just a sprain. And even if it were, he cannot walk. Look, I am not saying we can never go. I am just asking to push it a bit. I checked. We can move the dates. We might have to pay a fee, but it is not like all the money disappears. He crossed his arms. I am going. I have been counting down to this. I am exhausted. I am not letting your dad's drama ruin it. There it was again. Drama. That little word he used whenever I asked for something that was not convenient for him. When I wanted him to come to one of my work events? Drama. When I cried because his mom made a comment about my weight at dinner? Drama. When I got upset that he made a huge purchase without even telling me? Drama. It was like his get out of accountability free card. That night, he went to bed early after dropping, "I am too tired to argue about this," which is code for conversation over. And I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the blank television screen, planning out schedules in my head. I could increase the nurse visits. I could go to my dad's every day after work. I could maybe survive a week away if I set everything up perfectly. I tried to twist myself into a shape that would make everybody okay, even when I knew deep down that the person not okay would be me. The next day, I brought up the trip again, because apparently I like to torture myself. I told him I understood he wanted the vacation, that I wanted it too, but that I was still uncomfortable leaving. I mentioned again that the airline was willing to work with us. I even brought up that I had once skipped my cousin's wedding to sit in a hospital waiting room with his family when his mom had a routine surgery. He had sworn he would never forget that I chose them over a big family event. I hated myself for bringing it up, but I did. He stared at me like I had pulled out a ledger. "You cannot keep score like that," he said, offended. "That is manipulative." I laughed and it came out sharp. Manipulative? I am literally reminding you of the time I already did for your family what I am asking you to do for mine. I am just asking for the same level of understanding. He shook his head, already checking out of the conversation. This is not the same thing. My mom was going in for surgery. We did not know how it would go. It was a standard procedure, I said. The doctor said the risks were low, and you still wanted me there. Which I get. That is what partners do. He leaned back, arms folded. You need to learn to set boundaries with your dad. Every time he falls or catches a cold or has some small issue, you rush over like you are his personal nurse. He is an adult. He has insurance. He can figure it out. This trip is important for our marriage. That last line really got me. Important for our marriage. Apparently being there for my injured parent was bad for our marriage, but abandoning him to drink fruity cocktails somewhere was good for it. Got it. 3 days before the trip, He cornered me in the kitchen while I was packing a bag to take some clothes to my dad's place. He said, "Listen, I need you to promise me you are coming. I am not doing this back and forth all the way up to the gate. I need to hear you say you are going." I froze with a pair of sweatpants in my hands. I am not promising something I am not sure about. My dad is still barely moving around. The nurse says he keeps trying to get up alone. He keeps almost falling. I am scared to leave him. My husband's eyes hardened. "So which is it then? Me or your dad? Because that is what this is turning into. Every time there is a choice, you pick him." It felt like someone punched me. "That is not fair," I said, but my voice had that thin, shaky sound I hate. "It is not me or him. You are my husband. He is my dad. I am trying to take care of both." He shrugged. "I am telling you how it feels. And I am not going to keep being the bad guy because you cannot cut the umbilical cord. Either you show up at that airport, or you show me very clearly where your priorities are." That was the moment something cracked inside me. I did not explode. I did not scream. I just felt this cold, heavy thing settle in my chest. I realized that no matter what I did, he was going to make me feel like I was failing someone. If I went on the trip, I would be picturing my dad struggling to get out of bed. If I stayed, I would be the ungrateful wife who ruined the dream vacation. It was a rigged game. 2 days before the trip, he announced over dinner in the calmest tone, "I am going. I booked this time off. I paid for my ticket. I am not staying here to watch you hover over your dad. You do whatever you think you need to do." He did not ask again how my dad was doing. He did not ask about pain levels, about physical therapy, about anything. He talked about the good weather forecast like that was the only thing that mattered. So I stopped arguing. There is no point screaming at a wall. I focused on my dad instead. I increased the nurse's hours. I picked up handrails, shower chairs, all the things the therapist recommended. I learned how to wrap the ankle brace correctly. I sat with my dad while he pretended he was fine and watched him almost topple over trying to reach a glass on the counter because his wrists could not handle the weight. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and caught him halfway out of the armchair, wobbling like a toddler. I rushed to him, grabbed his elbow, and he winced as his ribs protested. "Sit down," I snapped more sharply than I meant to. He gave me this sheepish look. "What? I cannot just sit here and rot. I need to get to the bathroom." "You call me or the nurse," I said. "You do not just launch yourself across the room like that." He sighed. "I hate feeling useless," he muttered. Then softer. "I also hate feeling like I am messing up your life. Your husband must be furious." There was a pause where I should have lied and said everything was fine, but I was too tired. "He is not thrilled," I admitted. "He is going on the trip anyway." My dad's face fell in this weird mix of guilt and hurt. "I did not want to be a burden," he said quietly. "I thought he and I had a good thing going. We always talked about sports, you know. I thought he liked me. He just does not like when things are not on his schedule," I said before I could stop myself. On the morning he left, my husband wheeled his suitcase to the door without looking at me. There was no kiss, no hug, not even a pat on the shoulder. He just grabbed his passport from the bowl by the door, checked his phone, and said, "My ride is downstairs," like he was heading to a work conference. I watched him go, waiting for some last-minute pause. Some maybe we can figure this out. But the door shut, and that was it. The silence he left behind was not peaceful. It was this thick thing that pressed down on my chest when I tried to sleep. During those first days, my routine turned into this exhausting loop. I woke up, dragged myself to work, tried to pretend I was present while my mind was still at my dad's house, then drove across town after my shift to check on him. I heated up meals, helped him to the bathroom, made sure his medications were lined up correctly, adjusted the pillows under his leg. By the time I got home at night, my own house felt like a stranger's place. One night, in the middle of all that, my dad had this intense spike of pain. He called me around 2 in the morning, his voice tight and panicked. I drove over in sweatpants and an old hoodie, heart pounding, convinced something terrible had happened. Turned out the pain medication schedule had gotten messed up with all the different hands involved, and he had gone too many hours without a dose. We got it under control, called the nurse line, adjusted things. He calmed down eventually, but I sat on his couch until the sun started to come up, watching him breathe just to make sure. Sometime around dawn, while he finally slept, I pulled out my phone and sent my husband a message. I typed out this long text about what had happened, about how scared my dad had been, about how I had spent the night trying to manage everything. I ended it with, "I know you needed the break, but I really wish you were here. This is a lot." I watched the little status symbols on the app change. Delivered, read, then nothing. No reply that day, no reply the next. Instead, a few hours later, a picture popped up on a social media app we both use. There he was in sunglasses, drink in hand, standing in front of a pool that looked like it belonged in a commercial. The caption was something like, "This is the life," with a bunch of little sun emojis. In another photo, he was at some fancy restaurant, plates of food spread out like something from a magazine. People were commenting things like, "You deserve it," and "so jealous." And I just stared at my phone wanting to throw it out the window. A friend from work called me after seeing the pictures. "Hey," she said carefully, "is everything okay with you two? I thought you were going with him." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Plans changed," I said. "My dad got hurt. I stayed." "Did he really go without you?" she asked, her voice going from concerned to pissed in half a second. "Seriously?" "Yeah," I said. "Seriously. Girl," she whispered, "I do not want to say what I am thinking, but you know what I am thinking." I knew. I also knew I was not ready to say it out loud yet. We have this shared credit card we use mostly for household stuff and trips. I do the boring part, like checking statements, paying bills, making sure we are not accidentally buying a small island somewhere. During that second week he was gone, I logged in to pay off part of the balance and saw this one charge that did not fit. It was from some kind of spa package at the resort, double the price of the usual services. The description mentioned something about a couple package, and my stomach dropped. I stared at that line so long the numbers started to blur. I told myself it could be a glitch. He could have treated another couple. He could have just booked the wrong thing and gone alone. I told myself all the stupid stories women tell themselves when they are trying not to admit that maybe the person they love is capable of being exactly the kind of person they swore they would never be. I hated myself a little for even thinking it. My dad was literally fighting just to get to the bathroom, and I was sitting at his kitchen table obsessing over a credit card line. I closed the app, shoved the phone face down, and told myself to focus on what was right in front of me, one crisis at a time. After about a week of this, I cracked. I was at my own kitchen table now, eating cereal for dinner because cooking felt like math, and my friend called again. She asked gently, "Have you actually talked to him since he left?" "No," I said, hearing how small my own voice sounded. "He has not called. He has not texted back. Nothing." She exhaled slowly. "You know that is not normal, right?" I shrugged, even though she could not see me. "He says he needs space when he is stressed. That is not space. That is punishment," she said. "Look, I am going to say something you are not going to like. You should maybe talk to a lawyer. Not because you have to do anything right now, but so you know what you can do if you want to." My first reaction was defensiveness. "I am not divorcing him over a trip," I said quickly. "I mean, yes, he is being an ass, but this is a lot." My friend was quiet for a second. Then she said, "It is not just the trip, and you know it. It is how he has been treating you for a long time. The silence thing. The way he makes everything your fault. You have been shrinking yourself for years. I am not telling you to leave him tomorrow. I am saying maybe stop acting like you are trapped when you might not be." I sat there, staring at the pattern on my countertop. The idea of talking to a lawyer felt extreme, like jumping off a cliff. I was raised on this whole idea that you stick it out, that marriage is hard work, that you do not throw it away because things get rough. But then I pictured my dad's face the night he was crying from pain, and my husband's face in that pool picture, and something inside me tilted. "Just to get information," my friend said. "Information is not betrayal." That line stuck with me. I could not sleep that night. I kept getting up, pacing, checking my phone even though there was nothing new, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, around 3 in the morning, I opened my laptop and searched for local divorce lawyers. The word looked ugly on the screen. I picked one almost at random from this list of people who probably heard stories like mine every day and filled out the little contact form. The next morning, they called me back and offered an appointment for later in the week. Walking into that office, I felt like I was cheating on my wedding vows just by being there. The lawyer was this calm woman with a soft voice and very direct eyes. She asked me to tell her what was going on, and I started with the trip and the accident and the silence. But once I started talking, other things came spilling out. The fight we had months ago when I mentioned wanting to quit my corporate job and open a small creative business, how he froze me out for days, the way he always controlled our social life, who we saw, when we saw them, the constant use of words like dramatic, unstable, needy whenever I pushed back. She listened without interrupting much, just asking little clarification questions. Then she explained, very matter of fact, what my options were, how separation worked here, what would happen with assets. She asked if I had anything that was mine alone, like property I had before the marriage. I told her about the little house I inherited from an aunt, the one we moved into after the wedding because it made more sense than renting. She nodded and said that an inherited house is usually considered separate property, as long as you kept things clearly in your name and did not mix everything completely. We talked about the shared credit card, our similar incomes, the fact that we do not have kids. She did not tell me what to do. She just laid out pathways like a map. When I left, my head was buzzing. Having options was both terrifying and weirdly comforting. That evening, at my dad's place, he tried to make scrambled eggs with one working hand and almost dropped the pan. I took over, gently shoving him back to his chair. He made some dumb joke about becoming left-handed and then stopped and peered at me. "You look tired," he said. "More tired than usual." I snorted. "Thanks. That is exactly what every woman wants to hear." He shook his head. "You know what I mean. You have that look your mom used to get when she was carrying something heavy in her mind." For some reason, that cracked something open. I told him about the lawyer. Not every detail, but enough. His eyes got big. "Are you sure that is what you want?" he asked. "I do not want you to blow up your life because of me. This is not because of you," I said. "You just pulled the curtain back faster. If it was not this, it was going to be something else eventually." He sighed. And for the first time since the accident, he looked a little smaller. "He has not called to check on me," he said quietly. "Not once." I swallowed hard. "I know." He reached over with his good hand and squeezed my fingers. "I love you," he said. "I hate that you are going through this, but I am glad I am not the only one seeing it." When my husband finally came back from his trip, his return was the opposite of dramatic. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was at home for once instead of at my dad's, folding laundry on the couch. When I heard the door open, he rolled his suitcase in, tan and relaxed, like he had just come from a wellness retreat. He gave me this little nod, like, "Hey, what is up?" as if he had not ghosted me and my injured father for 2 weeks. He dropped his keys in the bowl, glanced at the stack of mail on the table, and said, "Did anything important come while I was gone?" Like he had been out grabbing groceries. I stared at him for a second, because my brain genuinely could not process that level of casual. "You did not answer my messages," I said. "At all." He shrugged, kicking off his shoes. "I needed to unplug. That was the whole point. The service was terrible down there anyway. You know how it is." I thought about the time-stamped photos he had been posting from the pool, from the restaurant, from the beach. "Also, I saw the charges on our card," I said. "That couple's spa package? Do not insult my intelligence." He did not even deny it properly. He just lifted a shoulder like it was boring. "It was a package they push on everyone," he said. "You are doing that thing again, turning everything into a story." He walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. "What are we doing for dinner?" he asked over his shoulder. "I am starving." Something inside me just snapped into place. Not like a blow-up. More like when you finally click a puzzle piece into the only spot it ever could have gone, and suddenly the whole picture makes sense. I walked to the bedroom, hands shaking, and took the envelope out from the drawer where I had been hiding it. The divorce papers felt heavier than they were. When I came back to the living room, he was flipping through the mail with one hand and scrolling his phone with the other. I set the envelope on the table in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, frowning like I had handed him a parking ticket. "Read it," I said. He opened it, skimmed the first page, and went pale. "You have got to be kidding me," he said. "This is a joke, right?" "It is not a joke," I said. My voice was weirdly calm. "I went to see a lawyer while you were gone. That is the petition." He looked up at me like I had slapped him. "You are divorcing me because I went on a trip we paid for?" I laughed, and it sounded almost hysterical even to my own ears. "No, I am divorcing you because you literally left me to deal with my hurt dad alone, did not contact me once, then came home and asked what is for dinner like I am your maid. The trip was just the clearest example so far of how you see me." He shook his head, paper rustling in his hands. "You are being ridiculous. I have always been independent. You knew that when you married me. I am not one of those guys who needs to be glued to his wife every second. Independent is one thing," I said. "Abandoning your partner during a family crisis and then stonewalling them for 2 weeks is another." He scoffed. "Your dad was fine. You just like to play the hero. You wanted me on my knees thanking you for sacrificing your vacation. When I refused to feed into that, you ran to a lawyer." There it was again. My feelings framed as an over-the-top performance. Drama. I could almost hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. I did not run to anyone, I said slowly. I walked. I thought about it. I talked to people. I considered my options. This is not a tantrum. He threw the papers onto the table. So what? You are just done? That is it? You are going to throw away all these years because of this? I took a deep breath. This is not just this. This is every time you use silence to punish me. Every time you made me feel crazy for having needs. Every time I shrank myself so you would not call me dramatic. This trip just made it impossible for me to lie to myself anymore. We went back and forth like that for a long time, him insisting he had done nothing wrong. Me listing things I had kept tucked away in my chest for years. He kept circling back to the money, how much we had spent, how irresponsible it would be to just throw it away. I realized, somewhere around the third time he mentioned the price of the tickets, that he was more upset about the financial investment of the marriage than the emotional one. Finally, after what felt like hours, I said, "You can pack a bag and go stay somewhere else. I am not asking. I am telling you. I need space. I need you out." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You are going to regret this," he said, voice low. "You are being impulsive. You are making a huge mistake because you are emotional right now." "Maybe," I said, "but I would rather regret leaving than spend the rest of my life regretting staying." He grabbed a duffel from the closet and started throwing clothes into it. It was messy, hurried, nothing like his usual obsessive packing lists. He slammed drawers, stomped around, muttered under his breath. At the door, he paused, hand on the knob. "You cannot say I did not try," he said. I almost laughed again. "You did not," I said quietly. "That is kind of the point." The door closed behind him with a thud that seemed to echo way louder than it should have. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled up to my chest, and sobbed. Not cute crying either. Ugly, snotty, whole body shaking crying. I felt grief for the man I thought I married, for the version of my life I had been holding on to with white knuckles, for every time I had told myself it would get better if I just tried harder. The next couple of days, he called. The first time was 3 days later in the middle of my workday. I saw his name on the screen and my stomach flipped. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, I stepped into the stairwell at work and answered. "What do you want?" I asked. "No hello. No small talk." "This is ridiculous," he said. I could hear street noise in the background. "How long am I supposed to stay in this hotel? Do you have any idea how expensive this is?" There it was. Not, "How are you?" Not, "How is your dad?" Just, "Do you know how expensive this is?" "Nobody is forcing you to stay in a hotel," I said. "You chose to leave. You could stay with a friend or find a short-term rental or figure out your own life like the independent man you keep telling me you are." He huffed. "Can we just hit reset? I said some things, you said some things. I needed that trip, and I am not going to apologize for that. But I miss you. I miss home. If you miss me so much, why did you not call me once while you were gone?" I asked. He stalled for a second. "I told you. The reception was weird, and I did not want to get sucked into drama while I was trying to relax." I closed my eyes. "I am not doing this," I said. "I am moving forward with the divorce. Talk to your lawyer." "You are really going to throw everything away over your feelings?" He snapped. "Yes," I said. "Over my feelings. Wild concept. I know." After that, the texts started. First, it was the fake apology texts. "I am sorry you felt hurt," and "I am sorry if you misunderstood," and "I am sorry things turned into this," which is not the same as "I am sorry for what I did." Then came the guilt trips. "I never thought you would be this cruel. And I cannot believe you are doing this to me after everything I have done for us." When I did not respond, he switched strategies again. One night, my phone lit up with a series of voice messages. His voice was all broken and shaky, like he had been crying. He said things like, "You are my whole life," and "I do not know who I am without you," and "I will do better. I promise." I listened to them sitting on my couch with a blanket around my shoulders, and my heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions. Part of me remembered the guy I married, the one who used to make stupid jokes to cheer me up, who brought me takeout when I worked late, who danced with me in our tiny kitchen at midnight. That part wanted to run to him, to believe that this was a turning point, that he finally understood. The other part remembered the look on his face when he left for that trip, the way he dismissed my dad's pain as drama, the couple's spa charge, the silence. That part won. I silenced the thread. I did not block him yet, because we still had to deal with logistics. But I stopped feeding into the roller coaster. A couple of weeks into this weird limbo, I went back to see the lawyer. She had been waiting for his formal response. When I sat down in her office, she slid a folder across the desk. "He is not contesting the divorce itself," she said, "but he has some requests." The word requests turned out to be an understatement. In his official response, he agreed that the marriage was irretrievably broken, which, sure, that is one way to put it. Then he listed financial demands that made my jaw drop. He wanted monthly support from me, even though we make basically the same amount of money. He wanted a chunk of my retirement account. Most insultingly, he wanted the house sold so that the proceeds could be split down the middle. "This house was left to you before you even met him, correct?" my lawyer asked. "Yes," I said. "My aunt left it to me in her will. My name is the only one on the deed. We did some renovations after we moved in, and we both contributed to that. But the actual property is mine." She nodded. "He is arguing that because marital funds were used for improvements, he is entitled to half of the equity. It is a stretch, but not completely unheard of. Still, based on your documentation, we have a strong argument that the core value of the house remains your separate property." I stared at the numbers on the page. It was not just about the money, it was what it represented. He had always bragged about being independent, about never needing anyone, about how he could walk away from anything and land on his feet. Now, suddenly, he wanted me to pay him to leave and take half of the only thing that actually felt like mine. "So basically," I said slowly, "he ignored me for 2 weeks, came home like nothing happened, got served, and now he wants me to fund his exit." My lawyer's mouth twitched in something like sympathy. "That is one way to look at it." She pointed out another section. "He also claimed that you are emotionally unstable and prone to overreaction, and that your decision to pursue divorce is a symptom of that. He framed your care for your father as enmeshment and said you have difficulty separating your marriage from your family of origin." I barked out a laugh even as my stomach twisted. "So he is basically pathologizing me for not abandoning my injured parent." "He is framing it that way, yes," she said. "Do not take it personally. These filings are often written in the most dramatic way possible to strengthen their side of the argument. He is trying to make himself look reasonable by making you look irrational. He has been doing that for years," I muttered. "This is just the first time it is in writing." We started mediation a few weeks later. Sitting across from him in that bland conference room, with the mediator and our lawyers between us, felt surreal. He wore his nice button-down shirt, the one he always wore to important things, and he had that same calm face he used when he wanted me to feel dramatic for reacting. The mediator went through the list of issues: division of possessions, bank accounts, the shared credit card debt, the question of the house. To my surprise, he agreed pretty quickly on most of the smaller things. We split the furniture, the smaller assets, the debt. He did not fight me on the car. He conceded on the support payments once my lawyer pointed out how similar our incomes were. It was like he was trying to speed-run the process, as long as he could keep his eye on that one big prize. The only thing he refused to budge on was the house. "We both lived there," he said. "We both put money into it. I am entitled to half." "That house was gifted to her by family," my lawyer said calmly. "She could have kept it as an investment and never moved in with you. Instead, she offered you both a lower cost of living and stability. That does not magically make it marital property." He rolled his eyes. "Wow, so generous. Do I need to send a thank you card to her dead aunt?" The mediator cleared their throat and reminded us all to keep things civil. My hands were shaking under the table, but my voice somehow stayed steady. "You are not getting my aunt's house," I said. "You can take pretty much anything else we have collected together, but that stays with me. I grew up visiting that place. It is the only thing I have left that feels like mine. You do not get to take that too." He gave me a look full of contempt. "You are not thinking logically," he said. "You are letting your emotions run everything, as usual." "Cool," I said. "Then I guess my emotionally unstable self and her lawyer will see your reasonable self and his lawyer in court if we have to." During a break, my lawyer and I stepped into the hallway to breathe. She glanced at the paperwork and then at me. "He is going to keep using that language," she said quietly. "Dramatic, unstable, emotional. It is strategic. If he can get you to explode, he can point at you and say, 'See, that is what I mean.'" "So I am supposed to sit there like a robot while he insults my dead aunt?" I asked. "You are supposed to pick your battles," she said. "You are doing well so far. Let him show who he is on paper. We will handle the rest." Outside of the legal circus, life kept moving. I still had my full-time job. I still had my dad's recovery logistics. I still had to remember to eat and sleep and occasionally do something that did not involve paperwork or pain meds. Somewhere in the middle of all that, The thing I had buried months before resurfaced. My stupid little dream of quitting corporate and starting something of my own. Before the accident, before the fight, I had told my husband I wanted to open a small studio space with my friend, doing creative services. He had shut it down so hard that I had stuffed the idea into a mental drawer and slammed it shut. Now, weirdly, with my whole life already on fire, that drawer creaked open again. My friend brought it up one night while we were sitting on my couch eating reheated pizza. "You know," she said, "if there was ever a time to start over, it is when everything is already a mess." I groaned. "You are going to give me a motivational speech now?" She grinned. "Relax. I am not putting anything on a mug. I am just saying you talked about this forever. You even had a name picked out and everything. What if instead of pouring all your energy into surviving this divorce, you also poured some into building the life you actually wanted?" The thought made my stomach flip. "What if it fails?" I asked. She shrugged. "Then it fails. You will still be you. You will still have your skills. You will figure it out. But what if it does not fail? What if it goes okay?" My dad surprised me by backing her up. One evening, while we were watching some boring show together at his place, he said, "You used to light up when you talked about that business idea. You do not light up much these days. Maybe you should chase that again." "I do not want you thinking I am doing anything drastic because I am spiraling," I said. He snorted. "You are allowed to do things because you want them, not just because you are running away from something. Besides, if your ex thought you were irresponsible for wanting to use your own talents to build something, maybe that says more about him than about you." So slowly, in between hospital follow-up visits and meetings with lawyers, I started sketching out plans again. My friend and I ran numbers on my laptop at my kitchen table. We made lists of services we could offer. We looked at tiny, affordable office spaces and daydreamed about what we could turn them into. Another friend, one I had not seen much because my ex always said she was a bad influence, offered to invest a small amount to help us start. Every step forward felt like walking with weights attached to my ankles. I kept hearing his voice in my head, calling my ideas unrealistic, childish, irresponsible. I had nights where I lay awake, convinced that if the business failed, it would prove he had been right about me all along. But the thought of going back to my old life unchanged felt even worse. Meanwhile, my dad was slowly, stubbornly healing. We slowly reduced the nurse visits until it was just check-ins, and then eventually, none at all. Physical therapy started. He cursed under his breath when the exercises hurt and then apologized to the therapist like a kid caught swearing at school. He learned how to maneuver with a cane. The first time he made it from the couch to the kitchen without my help, he raised his arms like a boxer in the ring. "Look at me," he sagged. "Still got it." We finally reached a settlement in the divorce a few months later. He pushed on the house all the way up to the edge, but the combination of legal arguments and the fact that we had all the paperwork in order worked in my favor. In the end, he backed off, probably because the idea of a drawn-out court fight bored him more than the idea of getting less than half of what he wanted. The final agreement looked fair on paper. We split what we had built together. I kept my aunt's house. No support payments either way. It was objectively a clean break. Subjectively, it felt like crawling out of a minefield with my legs still attached. The day the divorce was officially finalized, I walked out of the courthouse clutching a folder of documents that said, in a few paragraphs of legal language, that I was free. My friend met me on the steps with coffee. My dad insisted on taking us both out to dinner to celebrate, even though he still walked with a slight limp and probably should not have been driving. We sat in a little family restaurant, the kind with sticky tables and loud kids, and for the first time in a long time, I could take a deep breath without feeling like it got snagged on something sharp. The business by then was actually a real thing. We had signed a lease on a tiny space with terrible fluorescent lighting and turned it into something cozy with lamps and rugs and a ridiculous number of secondhand plants. We had our first handful of clients. The income was nowhere near my old salary yet, so I kept one foot in my corporate job part-time while the new thing grew, but it felt like progress. A few weeks after the divorce, my ex showed up there. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My friend and I were in the middle of reorganizing some shelves when the door opened, and in he walked, like he owned the place. He glanced around slowly, eyes scanning the decor, the furniture, the half-finished coffee on my desk. "So," he said, lips twisting, "this is the big dream." My heart started pounding, but I forced my hands to stay busy. "We are in the middle of something," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "What do you want?" He smirked. "Relax. I am not here to cause trouble. I was in the neighborhood. The neighborhood, by the way, is nowhere near where he lives now. He had to go out of his way to be in the neighborhood. He walked over to a display and picked up one of our promotional cards, turning it over like he was examining a bug. "Cute," he said. "Very small." My friend, bless her, straightened up and gave him a look that could cut glass. "Can we help you with something?" she asked. "We have actual work to do." He ignored her and kept talking to me. "I just wanted to see what you traded our marriage for," he said. "It is funny. You blew everything up over your dad and this little project, and for what? A cramped office and a dad who will not be around forever?" That one hit low. I felt my face flush. "Get out," I said quietly. He tilted his head. "You know," he said. "The trip was amazing, by the way. The weather, the food, the company." He let that last word hang there, heavy and obvious. I remembered the couple's spa charge, the way his smile looked in those photos. A little different, a little more performative. "Of course you found someone to stroke your ego while you were there," I said. My voice still sounded calm, which surprised me. "You needed someone to tell you that you were the good guy." He laughed. At least she knew how to have fun. Did not spend the whole time obsessing over her dad. There was a time when that sentence would have gutted me, when I would have obsessed over who she was, what she looked like, what she had that I did not. In that moment, all I felt was tired. "I am glad you had a good time," I said. "Really. I hope you and your vacation fling and your fragile ego have a beautiful life together. But you do not get to come in here and trash the thing I am building just because you do not have access to it anymore." My friend stepped closer, crossing her arms. "You need to leave," she said to him, voice firm. "Now, or I will call building security." He looked between us like he could not quite believe we were not crumbling under his words. "You are making a mistake," he said to me one last time. "You could have had it easy." I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I did have it easy," I said. "That was the problem. Easy and lonely and small. I would rather have hard and honest." He shook his head and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. The plants on the shelf next to the entrance shook slightly from the impact. For a second, I just stood there listening to the echo. My friend turned to me. "You okay?" she asked. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "I think so," I said. Weirdly, yes. People always want to know what happened after that part too. Not just the legal stuff or the business stuff, but the messy human part. Did his family hate me? Did my friends pick sides? Did my dad ever stop blaming himself for causing all of this? Real life does not roll the credits just because a judge signs a piece of paper. His family did exactly what I expected. His mom called me a few days after he showed up at the office. I almost did not pick up when I saw her name, but curiosity won. She did not start with hello. She started with, "I heard you took him to the cleaners." I blinked. "Hi, good afternoon to you too," I said. She huffed. "You got the house and everything, and my son is in some tiny apartment. Do you feel good about that?" I leaned against my kitchen counter and stared out the window. "Your son tried to take the only thing I had left from my family and make me pay him to leave," I said. "I do not feel good about any of it. I feel like it is sad all around. But yes, I am glad I got to keep my aunt's house." "He only did that because you pushed him to the edge," she snapped. "You always were very sensitive. You know he needs space. You know he is not good with all this emotion." There it was again. Sensitive. Emotional. All the coded ways to say, "You are the problem for reacting to the problem." "You know what is wild?" I said slowly. "The fact that he left the state while my dad could not walk and you are calling me to ask how he is coping, not to ask if my dad is okay." There was a pause. Then she said, "Your father should take better care of himself at his age. Maybe if he did not insist on being so independent, this would not have happened. And maybe," I said, my voice going cold in a way that surprised even me, "if your son had not been so obsessed with his own comfort, my marriage would not have ended. But here we are." She made this offended little sound. "I see you are determined to be cruel," she said. "I do not know who put these ideas in your head, but this is not the girl I welcomed into our family. I am just the girl who finally stopped twisting herself into knots to keep your son comfortable," I said. "You do not have to like her." After that call, the rest of his family pretty much faded out. One of his cousins texted me quietly to say she understood and was there if I needed anything, but the aunts and uncles I used to spend holidays with went radio silent. It hurt. Of course it did. They had been my people for years. But honestly, the version of me they liked best was the one who smiled through disrespect and called it love. Once I stopped doing that, we did not have much in common. My own family had their moments too. My uncle, the one who prides himself on being practical, asked me at some gathering if I was sure I had not overreacted. He said, "Lots of people go on trips without their spouses. Are you really going to stay alone because of one bad decision?" I looked at him, then at my dad sitting 2 chairs away, his cane propped beside him. "It was not one bad decision," I said. "It was a whole pattern of decisions, and that trip just made it visible. I would rather be alone than with someone who treats me like an accessory to his plans." My dad cleared his throat. "She is not alone," he said quietly. "She has a house, a business, friends, and a cranky old man who owes her about 100 home-cooked dinners." My uncle shut up after that. The business had its own drama, obviously. The first few months looked cute on social media, but were terrifying behind the scenes. There were weeks when we had exactly 1 client and a stack of bills, and I would lie awake doing math in my head until it felt like my brain was overheating. There were days when my friend and I snapped at each other over tiny things because we were both stressed and scared, and trying not to show it. One time, after a client backed out at the last minute and took a big payment with them, I sat on the floor in the middle of our little office and cried. Big, ugly sobs. The kind where you cannot catch your breath and your chest hurts. My friend sat next to me, rested her head on my shoulder and said, "If we fail together. We will just tell everyone this was an elaborate performance art piece about money and burn the place down." I snorted mid-sob, which made this horrible squeaky noise, and somehow that broke the tension. We wiped our faces, ordered takeout, and spent the rest of the afternoon reworking our pricing and outreach plans. It was not glamorous. There was no montage. It was just 2 women being stubborn in the face of their own fear. Every so often, something would happen that almost made me miss my old life, like the first time taxes came around and I realized how much paperwork owning a business involved. Or when the heater in the office broke on one of the coldest days of the year and the landlord took forever to fix it, and we had to see clients wearing 3 layers and fingerless gloves. On those days, the idea of a regular paycheck in someone else's problem pile looked very appealing. But then I would remember the sick feeling I used to get on Sunday nights, when I knew I had a whole week ahead of me of keeping my head down at a job that made me feel like an interchangeable part. I would remember the way my ex used to talk about my idea like it was a cute hobby I would grow out of. I would remember sitting on the floor by our front door after he left, thinking, if I am going to destroy my life, I at least want to be the one holding the hammer. And slowly, things started to shift. A client referred us to another client. Someone left a nice review on our little website. We got an email from a stranger who had found us through a friend of a friend. The numbers in our spreadsheet started to look less like a screaming emergency, and more like something that could, eventually, turn into stability. My dad became our unofficial marketing department. He told everyone at his physical therapy sessions about my girls at the office, like we were running a world-changing startup instead of a tiny local business. One afternoon, a woman walked in and said, "Is this where the guy from rehab sent me?" And I knew exactly who she meant. It was not all triumph. There were still awkward run-ins. I saw my ex once at the grocery store. I was in sweatpants, of course, and he was in work clothes that made him look put together and successful. He walked over like we were casual acquaintances and asked how the little project was going. I could tell he was fishing for news of failure. "It is keeping the lights on," I said, "and my blood pressure is lower than it has been in years, so I would call that a win." He gave me this tight smile. "If you ever get tired of the hustle, there are easier ways to live," he said. I shrugged. "I tried easy," I said. "It almost killed me." He did this little laugh, like I was being dramatic again, and walked away. I stood there in the canned soup aisle, surrounded by strangers, and realized my hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing. I did not go home and replay the conversation 100 times, analyzing every word. I just grabbed my dad's favorite soup and moved on. On the first anniversary of the accident, my dad insisted we mark the date somehow. He said he wanted to take the power back, which is dramatic for a man who still mails in his bills. We ended up in his living room, eating takeout and watching bad television. And he raised his plastic cup of soda like it was a champagne flute. "To getting hit by cars," he said. I rolled my eyes. "Great toast, Dad," I said. "Very uplifting." He shrugged. "If that car had missed me, you would probably be on some beach right now, pretending everything was fine, trying not to cry when he called you dramatic for the 3rd time that week." "Wow," I said. "You really know how to make a girl feel better about her trauma." He smiled at me, the soft, tired kind of smile that has a lot of history in it. "You know what I mean," he said. "I'm not glad I got hurt, but I am glad you saw what you needed to see." I am glad you chose you, even if I had to play the annoying old man to get you there. I looked at his cane leaning against the couch, at the faint scars on his wrists, at the wrinkles around his eyes that had deepened over the last year. You are not annoying, I said. Well, not all the time, he snorted. I am absolutely annoying, he said. But I am your annoying, and you are mine. That counts for something. We clinked plastic cups like idiots and went back to our show. It was not some big cinematic moment. There was no swelling music. It was just us, in his slightly cluttered living room, breathing. When I think about that hospital chair now, I do not feel embarrassed anymore. I feel protective of that version of me. That night, after my dad's toast, I helped him stack the takeout containers, rinsed the cups, and he tapped my shoulder with that cane like he was reminding me to breathe. You okay? He asked. I looked around his cluttered living room, the soft hum of the TV, the quiet that did not feel threatening for once. Yeah, I said. I am okay. Did you like this story? Even though it's fictional and created for entertainment, it may reflect a reality lived by many people. Leave your opinion in the comments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. See you in the next video. My son started to feel ashamed of me because I worked as a cleaner to support him, and that destroyed me. There is this one memory that always pops up first when I try to explain how everything went wrong, and it is not even the worst moment. Just the one that kind of sums up the whole mess in one picture. Me in my work pants, still smelling like cleaning products, standing in the doorway of this fancy party room while my own son looks straight through me like I am just part of the staff. I did not get to that scene overnight, though, so I guess I have to start earlier, back when I still believed that surviving together was the same thing as being on the same side, and that love could make people forget where they came from, instead of making them desperate to run from it. I married my husband when I was 24, and still thought that working hard automatically meant things would slowly get better. Like there was some kind of invisible scale in the sky keeping track of every extra shift and every skipped treat. He had grown up in a complete mess of a home, with parents who collected failed relationships and overdue bills, and he used to joke that marrying me was the first grown-up choice he ever made. I did not come from anything glamorous either, but my chaos was the boring type. Just low-income, crowded apartments, and a mother who counted every coin twice before letting herself buy something that was not on sale. By the time we got married, I had already been working as a cleaner in office buildings for years, walking into shiny lobbies before the sun came up and leaving after everyone with a badge and a title had already gone home. He was waiting tables at a neighborhood restaurant, living off tips and caffeine, and when we looked at our numbers together, it was not pretty, but it was enough to pay rent on a small place, keep groceries in the fridge, and still argue about which cheap streaming plan we could afford. When I found out I was pregnant, it was not this magical movie scene with surprise flowers and happy tears. It was me sitting on the edge of the tub staring at a cheap test from the corner store, feeling my throat close and my chest open at the same time, and then him sitting on the bathroom floor with his head in his hands saying, very quietly, that we would make it work somehow. We did not have the luxury of me staying home, not even for a little while, so I kept working through the pregnancy, adjusting my pace but still scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans while my back screamed and my ankles turned into balloons by the end of each shift. We looked into daycare for when the baby arrived, did the math 3 different ways, and every single time the numbers laughed in our faces. There was no version where we paid daycare and still ate, so we did the only thing that made sense back then. After our son was born, my husband quit his job to stay home with the baby, and I took every hour my cleaning company offered me. People love calling that kind of decision modern or progressive when it is done by couples in cute apartments with savings and white furniture, but the truth is, we were just cornered by math. I got lucky a few months later when a bigger cleaning company took over some of the buildings I already worked in and offered me a full-time contract with better pay and more predictability. It was not some massive jump, but it meant I could stop wondering every week if I would be short on hours, and eventually they made me a shift lead, which was just a fancy way to say I had keys and slightly more responsibility for almost the same money. But the small raise still felt like a miracle back then. By the time our son turned 3, we had moved from surviving month to month to this very careful version of stability where the bills were paid on time most months, we could buy fresh fruit without panicking, and I could pick up something small for him at the store without needing 10 minutes of internal debate. He was this loud, curious kid who followed my husband around the apartment like a little shadow, and even though part of me hated that I was not the one at home seeing all his firsts, another part of me felt proud every time I looked at him and remembered that I was the reason the light stayed on. My husband used to tell me in those early years that I was his hero for working so hard. And I believed him, because back then it sounded like gratitude, not foreshadowing. When our son started school, though, everything shifted in this slow, sneaky way that I did not catch until it was already eating us from the inside. With him gone for most of the day, my husband started pacing the apartment like a caged animal, constantly talking about how he felt useless and stuck, how it was weird to be an adult man who did not have a job to introduce himself with. I understood. I really did. I knew what it meant to measure your worth in paychecks and job titles, even if the title was just the woman who cleans the bathrooms. So when he said he wanted to go back to work, I agreed before he even finished the sentence. We sat down with our schedules and our bills and figured out a plan where I would shift some of my hours to earlier in the day or later at night, so I could be the one picking up our son from school most days, helping with homework, actually getting to attend things like school plays instead of hearing about them secondhand. For a little while, the new routine actually felt good. My husband came home with stories from coworkers and regular customers. With this spark, I had not seen in his eyes in a long time, and I got to do the mom things I had secretly been jealous of. I would show up at the school in my work clothes, still smelling faintly of disinfectant, and my son would run into my arms like he did not care what I looked like or how tired I was, and it genuinely filled something in me that had been empty for too long. I picked up more of the housework on weekends to make up for his hours outside, telling myself it was temporary, that once we both found our rhythm, it would balance out again. Back then, I thought we were building something together. I did not realize he was already starting to look over the fence at other lives. He eventually landed a job as an assistant instructor at this high-end gym across town, the kind of place where people pay ridiculous amounts of money to run on machines inside while the rest of us walk everywhere because gas is expensive. He came home talking about the clients there like they were characters in some glossy show, describing their clothes and their vacations and how they treated spending extra on everything like it was nothing. At first, it just sounded like this weird fascination, like he was getting a glimpse into a world so different from ours that it almost felt fake. But slowly, the way he talked about it changed. Our tiny apartment went from cozy to cramped. Our old car became embarrassing. And my cleaning job, which he used to brag about because it kept us afloat, turned into something he side-eyed, like it was a temporary stage I should have grown out of already. He started saying things like, if you pushed for that supervisor position, we could move sooner, or maybe if you picked up a couple of weekend shifts, we could finally get out of this neighborhood. And even though he framed it like we were planning our future together, the pressure settled squarely on my back. At the same time, he began staying out later after work, claiming that he had to go to social events with coworkers or grab drinks with clients because that is just how networking works in this industry. And I found myself putting our son to bed alone more nights than not. When our son asked where his dad was, I repeated whatever excuse I had been given and tried not to show how hollow it sounded in my own ears. I did not notice exactly when our boy stopped asking for his father at bedtime, and just accepted that it would be me reading the stories and tucking him in, but that silence was its own kind of answer. I kept telling myself that my husband was just in a weird phase, getting used to being back in the working world, adjusting to a new environment where everyone seemed to own 3 houses and a boat, and that he would eventually remember the life we had actually built and not the one he thought he deserved. Looking back, I can see how naive that was. But at the time, I was too busy juggling schedules and counting tips in my head to realize how much resentment was quietly replacing gratitude in him. The night everything blew up started like 100 other nights. With me already half asleep on the couch, still in my work clothes, the television flickering in the background while I waited to hear his key in the lock. Our son was 7 then, asleep in the bedroom with his little collection of school drawings taped to the wall. And the apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. When the door finally opened, it was not just late, it was wrecked. Like he had brought the chaos from whatever bar he had been in straight into our front room. I smelled the alcohol before I even saw his face, and when I turned, he was swaying slightly, his eyes glassy in that particular way that says drunk but not happy, drunk and mean. I asked where he had been, not even yelling, just that tired edge all over my voice, and instead of giving me some lazy excuse like he usually did, he laughed, this ugly little laugh that did not sound like him at all, and said he was done pretending. At first I thought he meant he was done pretending that the late nights were innocent, that he would finally admit he had a problem with drinking or that the job was getting to him, but what he actually meant crashed over me in broken sentences. He told me he wanted a divorce with this weird, rehearsed calm, and then he dropped the part about having been seeing one of the clients from the gym for a year. A year. 12 months of me working double shifts and rearranging my life, while he was building a whole secret relationship with a woman who, as he so helpfully added, actually understands the kind of life I want. She was older, he said around 60, successful, owned her own small business and some rental properties, and she was charismatic and well-connected in a way he had never experienced before. He loved how important he felt standing next to her, and she made him feel like he could be more than just the kid from a broken home who married the cleaner girl. He had this almost proud tone in his voice when he described her, like he was reading from a brochure, and all I could think about, standing there in my stained work shirt with my hands shaking, was that he had chosen someone who would never have to wipe crumbs off a cheap kitchen counter at midnight. Someone who already had the life he used to say we would build together. When I asked about our son, about what exactly he thought was going to happen to the child who had been waiting for him at that door for 7 years, he shrugged, and said he figured the boy would be better off with me, that he was not cut out for parenting anyway, and did not see himself fighting for custody. The worst part was when he admitted that his grand plan with this woman did not include our son at all, not even on weekends, really, because she was not looking to start over raising somebody else's kid and wanted to travel and enjoy her money. He just said it, like it was this neutral fact, like our son was an optional add-on he could just skip. I felt something in me crack in that moment, not the soft heartbreak you feel when someone disappoints you a little, but that deep, ugly snap of realizing the person you built your whole life around is actually willing to treat your child like luggage. So we got divorced. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no long legal battles, just some basic paperwork, a custody agreement that basically confirmed what he wanted anyway, and a judge who looked at our income and our schedules and decided that full physical custody should be with me, with visitation rights for him if and when he felt like showing up. He was supposed to pay child support, but he treated it like a suggestion. Some months it came, other months it did not, and the gifts were always louder than the responsibility. I walked out of that building technically free, just me and my son against the world, but it did not feel like freedom. It felt like walking out of a burning house with only your kid and the clothes on your back, knowing you still smell like smoke. The next years were a blur of early mornings, late nights, and the kind of exhaustion that does not just sit in your muscles, but in your bones. I kept my cleaning job, took every extra building they offered, and did everything I could to make sure my son had what he needed. I was the one up at dawn packing lunches, the one sitting in those tiny cafeteria chairs at school meetings, the one learning how to fix leaky faucets from video tutorials because calling a handyman was a luxury. His father drifted in and out like some kind of visiting celebrity, showing up every couple of months with expensive sneakers, fancy gadgets, or tickets to events I barely recognized from the names alone. It was like he had decided that his role was to be the fun parent who dropped in with gifts, while I handled all the boring parts of parenting that do not look good in pictures. He would pick our son up in a borrowed car or one that clearly did not scream tight budget, drive him off to some fancy dinner or activity, and bring him home full of stories about how amazing everything was over there. I tried to focus on the fact that at least he was showing up sometimes, that our son needed both parents in some shape or form, but it was hard not to feel the sting when my kid came home comparing their outings to our regular nights of pasta and cartoons. One year, right around our son's 12th birthday, his father actually came to the small birthday thing I planned in our cramped living room. It was just a few of his school friends, some simple food I had stayed up late cooking, a homemade cake that leaned a little to one side, the whole we do what we can vibe that had always been our reality. His father walked in, looked around with this little smirk, and in front of everyone asked if I was still cleaning toilets for a living or if I had finally found a real job. I laughed it off, because what else was I supposed to do in the middle of my kid's birthday party? But inside, I felt like he had just taken a knife to every sacrifice I had ever made. After the party, my son cornered me in the kitchen and asked, very seriously, why I did not try to do something better if I hated my job so much, because his dad said I could make more money if I had more ambition. I wanted to scream that the only reason his father could stand there making jokes was because I had been busting my ass for years. But instead I just told him the truth, that it was honest work, that it had kept us afloat, that not everyone gets a career they love, and that I chose stability for him over chasing dreams I could not afford. He listened, but I could see from his eyes that the damage was already done. His father had planted the idea that I was small, that I was limited by choice, not circumstance. Later that same year, there was an important event at his school, some award thing he had been really excited about, and his father promised he would be there. My son kept checking his phone that night, glancing at the door every time someone new walked in, and I sat beside him, trying to hold my own disappointment together, while repeating that maybe traffic was bad, maybe parking was impossible, all the usual lies we tell kids so they do not have to feel the full weight of adult unreliability. His father never showed up. Instead, he sent a new device, some expensive thing, through a delivery service, with a short message about being caught up with work. Watching my son open that box, trying to act happy while his eyes kept flicking toward the empty seat next to him, was one of the few times I genuinely wanted to throw a gift out the window. Not long after that, in the middle of one of our inevitable arguments, my son said he would rather live with his dad because at least there he did not feel poor all the time. It was like being punched in the lungs. I had known for a while that the visits, the gifts, the glamorous stories were creating some kind of gap between us. But hearing it out loud from his mouth made me realize that the man who had walked away from us had somehow still managed to take my kid with him in a different way. As he moved into his teenage years, everything just sharpened. His father married the wealthy woman officially, and suddenly there were pictures all over this social media app of them in matching outfits at nice restaurants. Of my son in clothes I definitely did not buy. Of trips to places I had only ever seen in magazine pictures at waiting rooms. The narrative they built, very carefully, was that this woman was opening doors for him, giving him opportunities I could never have afforded, that she was some kind of fairy godmother stepping in where the poor, tired mom had failed. She paid for an expensive course he wanted to take. They took him on trips during school breaks, and every visit to their big house added another layer to the story he was telling himself about what a good life looked like. I kept doing what I had always done, working, showing up, trying to be consistent even when I was exhausted and bitter and wanted to scream every time I saw another picture of my son smiling next to them at some place I did not even know how to pronounce. The tension between us grew like mold in a damp corner, quietly at first, then suddenly everywhere. One night, during a particularly bad argument about him coming home late from their place and snapping at me over something small, he finally said it plainly, that I held him back, that I was trying to keep him in this tiny life because I was scared, that if I really loved him, I would want him to move into that world, not cling to this one. I wanted to tell him that what I wanted more than anything was for him not to turn into the kind of man who treated people as stepping stones, that the life I was scared of was not the one with money, but the one where love was a performance, where respect was always conditional on status. Instead, I just told him I loved him, that I was doing the best I could, and watched him roll his eyes like I had said something pathetic. Somehow the years sped up after that. Middle school turned into high school, and I was watching him grow taller while feeling smaller in his eyes. He turned 18 eventually, announced that he wanted to become a barber, and I was actually proud that he had chosen something practical and creative that did not depend on his father's wife's bank account. I scraped together the money to pay for his course, worked extra hours, cut corners everywhere. And when he graduated and started working at a shop, I stood there taking pictures with my old phone, thinking this might be the beginning of us finding each other again. That hope did not last long. Once he was earning his own money and spending more and more time at his father's house, the calls to me got shorter, the visits fewer, and our relationship turned into this thing that existed mostly through quick text messages and occasional holiday dinners where he seemed restless and half present. I was still technically his mother, but more and more I felt like an old teacher he had once been close to, someone from a chapter he had closed. By the time he turned 24, he was engaged to a woman I barely knew. He and his partner had been dating for a while, but I met her in passing twice, always at events organized by his father or the other side of the family, where I felt like a guest of a guest, someone who had received an invitation by mistake. When they announced the engagement, it was through a group message that included me along with a bunch of people I had never met. The photo was taken at some scenic place during a trip I had not even heard about. The wedding planning kicked into full gear, and I watched it happen mostly from the outside. I was not involved in choosing the venue, the dress, the colors, or any of the things you imagine a mother might help with. I did not expect to pick out centerpieces or anything, but I thought maybe I would at least be asked about the music, or where I would like to sit. Instead, I found out through an offhand comment from a relative that the seating chart had me tucked into a side table with some distant cousins, nowhere near the front rows reserved for immediate family. When I asked my son about it, he said something like, "Oh, we just thought it would be easier this way. Less drama," as if my feelings were a scheduling problem, not something that mattered. He also told me not to get there too early on the day of the wedding because they did not want people hovering around while they were getting ready, which stung more than I wanted to admit. Then came the part that broke something I did not even know was still intact. One afternoon we were talking about the reception, and I asked casually if he had thought about the mother and son dance. He looked uncomfortable, and said he had been thinking of skipping that tradition altogether because it felt kind of outdated and he did not want anything too sentimental. I swallowed my disappointment, told him it was his day and his choice, and tried to convince myself that maybe it was better, that I did not want to stand in front of everyone swaying awkwardly while they all judged my dress. A few days later, I was at a small gathering where his fiancée was talking to one of her friends, and they were excitedly going over the playlist for the reception. The friend mentioned how sweet the mother and son dance was going to be, and the fiancé, without thinking, said something like, "I know," and he picked the perfect song for his dance with his stepmom. She is going to cry for sure. I froze. I am not proud of what I did next. I did not confront anyone right there. I just quietly slipped outside, waited until I was alone, and then texted my son a simple question. Who exactly was he planning to dance with? At first, he tried to deny it, got defensive, said I was misunderstanding things and that people were gossiping. But when I told him exactly what I had heard, he finally admitted it. He had chosen to do the special dance with his stepmother. He said she had been there for him in his most important years, that she had helped him with opportunities, that she made him feel comfortable in the circles he moved in now, and that he did not want to make things weird by ignoring her in front of everyone. He threw in some line about how our relationship was private and complicated, and he did not want to put that on display. I cannot fully describe what that felt like. It was not just jealousy or hurt pride. It was this deep, cold humiliation, like he had taken every sacrifice I had ever made and quietly handed the credit to someone else in front of an audience. I told him, as calmly as I could with my hands shaking, that it hurt me deeply, that it felt like being erased, and he responded with something about how I was making it all about me on his day. That night I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from his childhood, all the nights I carried him when he had a fever, all the mornings I left before dawn to keep us afloat, and I realized I could not force myself to sit in that room and watch him publicly replace me. So I decided I was not going to the wedding. It was not a dramatic rage decision. It was this slow, painful conclusion that kept coming back no matter how many times I tried to talk myself out of it. When I told him, he reacted exactly how I knew he would, accusing me of being selfish, saying I would ruin his day, that people would talk, that I was proving everyone right about me being difficult. His fiancée called me separately, trying to mediate, saying she understood I was hurt, but that my absence would devastate him. I told her the truth too, that I had been devastated for years and that for once, I had to choose myself. On the night before the wedding, I turned my phone off for a few hours because I knew there would be calls and messages trying to wear me down, and I was afraid that if I heard his voice while he was in full panic mode, I would cave like I always had. I turned it back on in the morning and there were messages waiting. But what really hit was the call that came through right as I was trying to decide if I should shower or just stay in my pajamas all day and pretend the event did not exist. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered without thinking, and all I could hear at first was frantic breathing and background noise. It was my son, calling from someone else's phone, and he was in full meltdown. He was crying so hard he could barely get the words out, but I pieced them together. His father had shown up to the venue drunk, not slightly buzzed, but completely gone, causing a scene with the bride's parents, hitting on people, saying inappropriate things. The bride's parents, who cared a lot about appearances and reputation, were furious, and the whole situation was spiraling. My son kept saying I needed to come, that I was the only one who could calm his father down, that I had to fix it before everything was ruined. For a second, I almost grabbed my keys. Instinct kicked in, the old muscle memory of rushing in to clean up other people's messes, to sacrifice my own safety, my dignity, my feelings just to keep things from falling apart. But then I remembered the dance, the seat at the back, the years of being treated like an embarrassment, and I heard myself say something I had never said to him before, that I could not help him. I told him I was sorry that things were a mess, that it sounded awful, but that I was not his emergency contact anymore. He begged, his voice cracking, saying I was still his mother, that I could not just sit at home while his life exploded. And I reminded him very quietly that when he planned the event, he had made it clear who he wanted in the front row and who he did not. He tried to say it was not the same thing, that this was different, that he needed me, and I could feel my resolve wobbling a little. But then he said something about how if I really loved him, I would put my pride aside. And that was it. Pride is such a convenient word people use when they mean the bare minimum of self-respect. And I realized that for him, me having boundaries did not fit into his idea of what a mother was supposed to be. I told him I loved him, that I always had, but that I had spent his entire life setting myself on fire to keep everyone warm, and I was done being the designated extinguisher for problems I did not create. Then I hung up. I broke down after that, sobbing in the hallway like I had just watched him get hurt physically, not emotionally. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor to breathe. The guilt came in waves. Maybe I should have gone just this once. Maybe it would have been the thing that finally brought us back together. Maybe I was being cruel. But under all that, there was a calmer voice, one I was not used to hearing, that kept reminding me that every time I had rescued his father in the past, nobody had thanked me, and things had never changed. I did not answer when the same number called again 15 minutes later, and eventually, the call stopped. I did not find out exactly what happened at the venue until days later, when the dust had settled and people started talking. A friend of a friend who had been there filled me in, and the story was like watching a slow-motion car crash. My son's father had arrived at the wedding already drunk enough to stumble, wearing a suit that did not fit quite right, loud and overly friendly in that way that makes everyone uncomfortable. He started hitting on the bride's mother, making comments about how good she looked for her age, touching her arm, not taking the hint when she tried to pull away. The bride's parents, who took everything about this wedding personally, were horrified. As if that was not enough, when my son's stepmother tried to pull him aside and calm him down, he started loudly airing out their dirty laundry in front of anyone who happened to be standing nearby, accusing her of cheating on him, of only being with him because she wanted someone to show off, of using her money to control everyone. He shouted about things that had obviously been festering for years, saying how she had never wanted him involved with his old life, meaning me and our son, and how she had made him feel like a guest in his own house. Guests started to quietly move toward the exits while pretending not to stare. At some point, he lost his balance and fell into a row of chairs, knocking them over like dominoes, while the wedding planner tried desperately to keep things together. The bride's parents finally had enough. They told their daughter they were not going to stand there and pretend this was normal, that they would not be part of a union with a family that brought that kind of chaos into such an important day. They walked out, and a decent chunk of their side of the guest list followed them. The officiant refused to proceed, and the venue manager called security, so the ceremony was officially shut down before anyone could walk down the aisle. The wedding never actually happened. There was no exchange of vows, no dance, no cake cutting, just a mess of shouting, crying, and people trying to leave without getting dragged into it. My son sent me a long email a few days after that. It was one of those messages where someone tries to do everything at once. Apologize, explain, justify, blame. He wrote about how embarrassed he was, how furious he was with his father, how heartbroken he felt about his fiancé's parents pulling the plug. But he also made sure to slip in a line about how if I had been there, I might have been able to stop it. He did not write it outright as "this is your fault," but the implication was there, hanging between the sentences. I stared at that email for a long time and then closed it without replying. I realized that if I responded, I would probably fall into one of my usual roles: the comforter, the explainer, the peacekeeper. I would say something reassuring about how what happened was not his fault, about how maybe things could still be fixed, and in doing that, I would take on responsibility again for a disaster I had not created. So I did something new. Nothing. I let his words sit in his inbox and stayed silent. It felt unnatural, wrong even, but also strangely calm, like sitting completely still after running for years. The months after the canceled wedding were rough. I did not suddenly become some glowing example of self-care just because I started ignoring emails. There were days when I barely got out of bed, when the quiet in my apartment felt like punishment instead of peace, when I replayed every choice I had ever made as a mother, and wondered where exactly I had lost him. I questioned that wedding decision 1,000 times. Could I have prevented the whole disaster just by showing up and babysitting my ex one last time? Would my son still be engaged? Still think of that day as a happy memory instead of a nightmare? Then, slowly, life started sneaking back in through the cracks. One of my neighbors, a woman who had nodded hello in the hallway for years but we had never really talked, knocked on my door one afternoon with a bag full of yarn and said she was dragging me to this little community craft group she went to every week. I tried to say no, that I was tired, that I was not crafty, that I had too much to do, but she refused to leave until I agreed. I showed up at that group expecting to feel awkward and out of place, but instead there was this weird warmth in the room, a mix of women of different ages talking over each other while their hands moved automatically, knitting, crocheting, beading, whatever. At first I just sat there, pretending to care about the scarf I was half-heartedly trying to make. But week after week, I kept going. And without even realizing it, I started telling them bits and pieces of my life. Not the whole saga at once, but little stories, a comment my ex had made, something my son had posted on social media, how the wedding had crumbled. They did not judge me or try to fix it with fake wisdom. They just listened and sometimes made jokes at the expense of the men involved, which was exactly the kind of therapy I needed. Little by little, those evenings became something I actually looked forward to, a break from the loop in my head. It was one of those women who convinced me to try a dating app. I laughed in her face at first, told her I was too old, too tired, too messed up, that I had no interest in going on awkward coffee dates with strangers. She rolled her eyes and said I was not being asked to marry anyone. Just to have conversations that were not about cleaning supplies or past trauma. We sat on my couch one afternoon, and she helped me set up a profile, choosing pictures that did not make me look like I was about to clock into work, and writing a bio that was honest but not depressing. I remember feeling ridiculous, like I was trespassing in a space meant for younger, shinier people, but at the same time there was a tiny spark of curiosity. I matched with a few men who went nowhere, conversations that died after 2 messages or turned into boring small talk about the weather and favorite shows. Then I matched with someone who, on paper, did not look like anything special, divorced, had a regular job in maintenance at a building, liked cooking, had a grown child he was not very close to. We started talking, and something about the way he asked questions, actually listened, did not rush to prove anything, made me feel strangely comfortable. We messaged back and forth for weeks before I agreed to meet in person, because I was still half convinced he would turn out to be a serial liar or someone with a secret family. Our first meeting was supposed to be quick, just a drink at a quiet place not far from my apartment, but it turned into hours of conversation. We traded stories, some funny, some painful, and he did not flinch when I told him about my ex, about my son, about the wedding. He did not try to play therapist, did not insult my son, did not act like he was the hero for just listening. He just nodded, asked follow-up questions, and at one point, when I apologized for rambling, he laughed and said, "You know you are allowed to take up space, right?" I went home that night feeling lighter than I had in a long time. We kept seeing each other. There were no grand gestures, no whirlwind romance montage, just a slow, steady building of trust. He showed up when he said he would. He texted when he was going to be late. He never made jokes about my job. He did not treat my past like baggage he had to tolerate, but he also did not use it as an excuse to put me on a pedestal. It was normal, which felt almost exotic after the emotional roller coaster I had gotten used to. Months went by, and without really making a big decision, he slowly became part of my daily life. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about my son through other people. The engagement was officially over. The ex-fiancé had moved on, her parents had cut off all contact with his family, and he had moved back in, at least temporarily, with his father and stepmother. Then came rumors that the relationship between his father and that woman was crumbling too, that the drunken incident at the wedding had ripped open things they had both been pretending were fine. I did not feel schadenfreude exactly. It was more like this numb confirmation that the shiny, perfect life my ex had chased had rust under the surface just like everything else. My son sent a couple more emails over the next year. They had fewer apologies and more analysis, like he was trying to build a case in his own defense. He talked about how hard it had been growing up between 2 very different worlds, how confusing it was to have one parent who could barely pay bills and another who made money appear like magic. He wrote about the pressure he had felt to pick a side, to prove he was not ungrateful to the one who paid for courses and trips. And between all of that, there were little jabs, suggestions that if I had made more money, if I had been less tired, if I had tried harder to fit into their world, things would have been different. None of those messages contained the words, "I am sorry," in a simple, clear way, so I kept not answering. I do not know exactly when 5 years slipped by, but suddenly I was looking at a calendar and realizing that the anniversary of the non-wedding had come and gone multiple times. By then, the man I had met through the app was no longer just someone I was dating. He was my partner, my constant. We had moved in together into a slightly bigger place that still was not fancy but felt like home, with mismatched furniture we both had collected over the years, and a kitchen where we actually cooked together instead of eating over the sink. We talked about everything, fought sometimes in regular human ways, made up without anyone threatening to leave the country in a fit of drama. When he asked me to marry him, it was not some elaborate surprise. It was a conversation at our kitchen table after dinner, where he said he could not imagine growing old with anyone else, and asked if I felt the same. I did. Our wedding was small, held at a modest community center room decorated by our friends from the craft group. There was no strict dress code, no seating chart, no dedicated dance for anyone's ego. I did not invite my ex-husband, obviously. I did not invite my son either. Part of me hesitated, wondered if that would finally close a door that maybe could still be cracked open, but the truth was that door had been closing from his side for years. I had heard through mutual contacts that he had eventually married someone else, a woman from a regular background. Not rich, not obsessed with appearances, just normal. They had a small ceremony, nothing like the production the first one was supposed to be, and he had not invited me. I found out after the fact, and this time the knowledge did not stab me in the same way. It hurt, of course, but it felt more like a dull ache, the kind you get from old injuries when the weather changes. I imagined him standing there, saying vows again, and I hoped, in a distant way, that he would treat this woman better than he had treated me, better than he had allowed himself to treat me. Every now and then, someone will mention him in passing, or show me a recent picture of him they saw online, and I still feel that brief freeze inside, like my body has to process his name before my mind does. I do not hate him. That would be too simple. What I feel is this complicated mix of love, loss, regret, anger, and acceptance that does not have a clean label. The same goes for my son. He is still out there, living his life, cutting hair, paying bills, posting pictures with his new wife and their friends. He has my number. My email has not changed. If he ever wants to have a real conversation, one that does not involve assigning me a role in his personal drama, I am here. I just will not be the one chasing anymore. As for my ex-husband, last I heard, he and the rich woman finally split for good. Apparently all the things he used to brag about, her money, her connections, her elegant circle, came with conditions he could not always meet. When he lost his charm or embarrassed her too publicly, the support dried up. He went from being the shiny project to the headache she did not want to deal with. The irony of him ending up alone after abandoning the family he had built with me is not lost on me. But instead of enjoying it, I mostly just feel tired. He was the first person I ever thought of as home, and now he is just someone whose name makes me check that my emotional locks are still secure. I still clean offices for a living. People sometimes assume that after all of this, I must have gone back to school or changed careers, found some new calling, but the truth is, I did not. I got better contracts, sure, shifted to buildings that pay a little more and treat staff with slightly more respect. But I am still the woman pushing the cart down the hallway, wiping fingerprints off glass doors so other people can walk into shiny lobbies and feel important. For a long time, I was ashamed of that. I thought my worth depended on how far I could get from the version of me who scrubbed bathrooms for a paycheck. Now, when I put on my uniform, I still sometimes feel that old sting when someone looks right through me. But it is not as sharp. I know what this job has paid for. A roof, food, the chance for my son to take a course, the little savings account I share with my new husband for emergencies. I know the strength it took to keep clocking in when my heart was broken, when my body hurt, when my own child looked at me like I was small. I do not need anyone else to understand that for it to be real. Sometimes, late at night, when my new husband is asleep and the apartment is quiet except for distant traffic sounds, I catch myself thinking about that canceled wedding. Not because I wish I had been there, but because that is the day I finally realized I was allowed to stop begging people to see me. I was allowed to sit one out, even if it made other people uncomfortable. I was allowed to let someone else's disaster unfold without jumping in as the unpaid cleanup crew. If you are waiting for some neat ending where my son shows up at my door in tears and we hug and everything is healed, I am sorry. That is not how real life works, at least not mine. Maybe one day we will talk. Maybe we will never see each other again. Both possibilities hurt in different ways, but neither one defines me anymore. For the first time since I was 24 and holding a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands, my life is not built around what he or his father chooses to do. My life is built around quieter things now. The way my new husband laughs at his own bad jokes. The way my craft group friends always bring too much food. The way clean floors shine under fluorescent lights at 3 a.m. when nobody else is around. None of it is glamorous. None of it would make a good commercial. But it is mine. And if that makes me small in some people's eyes, then maybe small is better than invisible, because at least I can see myself clearly here. And I am finally done apologizing for the space I take up. Did you enjoy this story? Joy? Even though it's fictional and made for entertainment, it can reflect real situations that many people live through in silence. Tell me in the comments, What would you do if you were in her place? And do you think she made the right choice by not going to the wedding? If this story kept you watching until the end, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. See you in the next video.